But those people, specifically the ones that came across, were the young men, the warriors, often on raids or trying to go into new lands. And in the case of Europe, they actually arrived in Europe probably about the same time or just after there was some kind of devastating plague of some description that actually wiped out quite a lot of the native population, particularly the men of the old Europeans, and then they mixed in with old Europeans, and so we ended up with a kind of hybrid groups of people in these different places from that Indo-European group. But I believe that a lot of the mythology that comes through, since those Indo-Europeans essentially became the ruling class, the warrior class, which is the nobility and the royalty of a very, very, very ancient Europe, bronze, basically Bronze Age, Copper Age. That those myths are the ones that basically became the European myths, in this case the Greek myths, but they're from a much older time, and that over time layers just kind of get added to them until they become what we are familiar with as the canonical myths. But those myths are from a much older time, and that, for example, the character of Heracles, he is certainly much older than the Greeks. That he was brought into what would become Greece by the tribes that would become the Greek tribes. That he's basically part of almost every sort of variant Greek tribal mythology. Apart from the Athenians, he's not Ionian, apparently. That's one of the interesting things, but he's adopted by them later. But that mythology is much, much older, and the concepts that are in it are much, much older because they're also common. They have a lot in common with the mythology of Avestan Iran and of Vedic India. So, for example, the dragon slayer myth, in Greek mythology, you have Zeus is a dragon slayer, Apollon's a dragon slayer, and Heracles is a dragon slayer. They all have this concept of they slay the dragon of chaos and put order over their cosmos. But that's the same in the Vedas. There's Indra does the same with Vritra, the dragon there, and then Feridun in the Iranian mythology does the same thing there too. So there's this similar, you can see these almost identical threads that have just slightly changed to adapt to what would have become that culture in that area, but they all come from the same source ultimately. So it's really interesting to me that there is something much, much deeper that has manifested into what we consider to be, this is a Greek myth, or this is Iranian myth, or this is Indian myth, or whatever. But ultimately, those will derive from something much older.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have been encountering something like that. Also, when we follow even the knowledge of medicine, what we will call medicine now. That have you heard about the Pelasgians?
The Pelasgians, yeah.
Yeah. So
neighbors.
Yes.
Names.
Yeah, and also connected with these tribes that were mobile and were moving around like horse tribes, that were moving all over, and you can see how, let's say in this case that I'm telling you, how there is some because the Greeks themselves were saying Greeks, let's say Greeks, but people that are Greek speaking in the Greek speaking world, they were talking about these Pelasgians, and you can see how also something very much alike appears in Italy with the Etruscan ideas. So it became like, and you can see how this was spreading around the north and kind of dripping down to the Mediterranean. When you follow, you are following the rites, let's say the codes, and the practices with the plant knowledge, or even concoctions, venoms, all of this pharmakeia concept.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's a kind of interesting thread where, example, India, the doshas, which are the sort of various forces, earth and air and water, kind of heaviness, lightness, wetness, moistness. These concepts that there's 3 doshas in India, but apparently there used to be 4, and they tie almost identically into the Greek concepts, of the humours, of Galen's humours. They're like, so Indian medicine and ancient Greek Roman medicine has so much in common. It's almost hard if you took away the exact terminology and just put in the concepts, it would be almost impossible to determine which one was which.
Exactly. So that's why these horse tribes kind of caught, of course, our attention. Like, as they were mobile, you cannot find temples, because obviously you're not building temples if you are moving around, but you can follow the cult kind of thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like when you say the cult, let's say we're saying everything, like what we will say, medicine or practices or however you.
Correct. I mean, that's basically what I'm trying to do with WarYoga. Is I'm trying to look at that from the martial tradition.
Okay. And
basically the exact same thing.
Yes.
That exact idea, trying to put it all together and trace it.
That's amazing, man. That's fascinating. Actually, that's what I would love to go. Like as I was giving you this example of following, let's say, medicine or pharmakeia or drug knowledge. How do we see that in the martial concept or what it means? I guess like martial will mean comes from Mars.
Yeah, the martial metaphysical tradition. So these mobile warriors were exactly that. They were warriors. Their reason to exist is to fight, and so. If we step for a second in India, they have the actual caste system, and then obviously there's different class systems that went through ancient Europe as well. But ultimately, you have priests, warriors, and craftsmen, and those are the 3 top groups in all the cultures from Europe and India and Iran. They have these concepts of right at the top are priests and warriors, and so. At the earliest stage, priests and warriors are kind of almost interchangeable, that they're the same thing, that the warriors... So a king does the rites. The king is a warrior. The king in state rights, the king is in charge of the sacrifices, in charge of all these things. He is tied in intrinsically into the concept of the land. But you've got this idea of the warrior class having to go, and their entire function, as we know from something like the Bhagavad Gita, for example, is to fight, and that's their function, and that doing their function is exactly what they have to do, and that's outside of morality in some regards. That those things kind of get suspended. But in order to fulfill that function, they have to go through several exercises, like sort of spiritual exercises, psychological exercises, which is where I believe so separate modern yoga, first of all, from ancient yoga. They're 2 completely different things. Modern yoga is a 19th century construction, and ancient yoga is very different. But I believe that the ancient yogic practices ultimately come from the warrior class having to get themselves psychologically prepared in order to be able to commit violence and have violence committed to them. That is something that is extremely difficult to do unless you have the preparation in order to do it.
Probably related with initiation rites. Probably.
100%. Mm-hmm. In fact, the ancient concept is that you are not a member of your class or caste or whatever you want to call it until you've been initiated. That's where the idea of being twice born comes from. So that a warrior or a priest or whatever, they're twice born. They're born once physically, and then they're born again through the initiation. And that only once they've had that second birth can they be considered a man, and can they be considered a member of their group.
Amazing. So we can see the parallelism with the initiation or the mystery rites in Greece.
Initiation is critical. Mm-hmm. I see that actually through the Indo-European tradition is the common thread is actually something that I I've explored quite deeply is the idea of the wolf cult. So the wolf is the totemic animal of the warrior. There's actually three totemic animals: the wolf, the bear, and the boar in European tradition. But the wolf specifically is very much tied in with the youth warrior band, the Ephebi, and obviously you've got things like the Roman Lupercalia, where the youths have to do wolf rites. There's wolf rites in India with the Vratyas. There's the Iranians have wolf rites, and so the wolf is the symbol of the warrior because it is swift. It is a daytime hunter. It actually hunts during the dawn and the dusk. It's what they call crepuscular. So it actually doesn't hunt at night. It hunts in light when the light's strongest, dawn and dusk. It works as a group. It functions because it works together as a group, just like a band of warriors. It's considered to be invisible or extremely swift. And that's where you get, for example, the Germanic berserker traditions, where they actually wear the wolf skin. You know, the Roman leaders of certain Roman units would wear the wolf pelt over their armor. So this wolf cult, and there's actually some evidence in Russia. It's called like Krasnomarkoe, something like that. It's not exactly right, but it's Krasnomarkoe, where they were doing a dog/wolf rite for the young men, the young warriors, which they would probably have to go and sacrifice a wolf, their own wolf maybe that they raised, or dog, and then they would take on, and the presumption of the reconstruction is that they would then take on that power and become the kind of wolf man. And that's where a lot of our werewolf myth comes from, the idea of the man wolf, because werewolf just means man wolf. There's a Greek mythology about it where for example, in Mount Lycaon, where there's a very famous werewolf story, but ultimately the men there would go to the sanctuary of Zeus Lycaos, which means wolfish Zeus. They would do a rite in secret in this forbidden area, and some of them would have to become a wolf and go off into nature for a while, and then return after a few years and become men again. And so they had become the werewolf, the wolf man, the man who can be a wolf but also be a member of society, because those two things, being out in the wild and being a savage and being in society, they don't necessarily live together well. And so you have to somehow balance those two things, and that some people could never come back to society. But that ultimately is this idea of the wolf initiation, that the young men at a certain age, and you can see it in the Spartan Roge, you can see it in the Athenian Ephebia, they would have to go out into the wild, essentially as wolves, as young wolves, live on the edge of society, fight against enemies that they meet, survive for themselves with just like a knife and a spear and not much else, in small groups. And then after they've done that for a couple of years, that's their part of their initiation finished, and then they can come back into society and become men. And so this wolf theme, I've just found it everywhere. It's the Indo-European diaspora,
and probably also, if one person will try to find references to pharmakeia being used on it, probably also you will find some, like, meaning that always in these initiation rites, as we are going in, as we have been researching, you will find that you will use specific stuff, or
yes,
drink specific drinks, or that you might see it now as, okay, they're using some drugs, but yeah, I mean, it's the use of nature kind of thing. So
right. But I mean, all drug usage was ritual.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there wasn't the same sort of recreational ideas of drugs. So drugs they used drugs for a specific purpose.
Exactly, and always to try to do something that will give something to the person.
Right, usually to kind of thin the veil, to make that barrier between worlds go thinner or disappear for that time, so they can see into another world. There's definitely that. I mean, the Eleusinian mysteries with the Kikion are, they developed into what they became, but they come from the similar idea. I mean, it's seeing the afterlife and seeing what awaits you, and that comes from the Kikion, which again is somewhat No one really knows exactly what it is, but it was basically a drink that had some hallucinogenic property, especially after some days of fasting. They drink that and then do nocturnal rites within the telesterion, which is completely closed off. So yeah, absolutely.
We have been diving deep on those mysteries, those mystery rites. Yeah, I mean, we went to like that's the Eleusinian mystery will be like the most let's say modern one we found after like, but it comes is if you are tracing back the mysteries, of course
Oh
you can
yeah,
go
it's
like
older.
and
I mean, the mysteries of Samothrace are very interesting too.
you're
So
hitting
I mean, I wrote about those.
you're hitting the
Return to
spots like
Hyperborea is about those things. So my work on that was Return to Hyperborea.
oh amazing. Well, we'll definitely read them all because
I'm not trying to plug
you,
my work, but that
you
was the
just
premise
said,
of Return to Hyperborea, the mysteries.
I mean, I must say this is the first time we talk, and you just hit like two of the specifics that we were physically recording on. So like Eleusinian in Eleusis, Samothraki, well, yeah, I mean,
Samothrace special. I
for
mean,
sure.
I've been there
You've been?
and sitting at that site, and there's a very famous there's a green stone, like the whole site's got lots of green stone, but there's this green lodestone, basically magnetic stone, and it's huge, and it sits right at a certain point of the site, which is actually much older than all of the buildings around it, because the buildings are much later antiquity. The site's like infinitely more ancient, and this lodestone is directed towards Draco, which was the pole star thousands of years ago. So it's like literally the site is aligned to something that used to be the pole of our solar system, but not for thousands of years. So it's like fast. That site is something else. There's like an energy there, for want of a better word. There's something there, like if you go and visit, you can't help but notice it. That's where you get people sitting around like that look like normal tourists, but you see they're almost compelled to sit and meditate or sit in quiet and feel something. There's something about that place.
Yeah, and could you be there? I mean, when you were there for a couple of days for
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I know what you mean. We all know what you mean. I mean, we were there like for almost 2 weeks.
Oh wow.
So, and we were living in the north of the island in a forest in the middle of it. The connection we had there. Not for a couple of days. We were like all over the.
There's ancient forces there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, Tom. So, sorry, keeping with the outline, which is difficult for me always. That's why
Okay, no problem. I'm not very good at keeping outlines.
So, should we go? Well, first, it's amazing that there's a lot of connection in your research with what we were doing. I just hit with this book, and now I understand for everything you are saying to us that this was a great idea to contact you. So if we keep following these martial ideas, and we go a bit into the future times, taking it from these origins, that seems to be that there were some mobile tribes that connected and different spots, because
Yes.
you'll say India, and I guess as you were taking the idea of east and west,
Yeah.
we can actually, if we see it in a map, it will be on the middle of it. So
Yep.
probably things started to happen to the west and also to the east.
Yeah.
And have you, as you have been living in the east, and you are from the west, and
Yeah.
have you been seeing these similarities, like after you thought that this might be, when you were saying to us that once you come back to the west after living in the east, and you will say that you can find these same similarities even as far as going into the actual east, let's say Chinese culture and all of this Asia idea of the martial
Yeah.
concept.
Yes. Yeah, I basically found that the same thing did exist in Europe. Ultimately, that exists in Asia. It's just covered in layers of things.
And will you say that they have a common origin?
So some parts maybe, and some parts no. I think so. Here's the interesting idea. So both areas, of course, human beings fight each other. You know, it's human nature, right? Even if you're completely unconnected in any way, you'll find that like wrestling or hitting each other is common to humanity. We've always liked to do that, and warfare, of course, is. But this spiritual element to it, which of course is a very natural thing because in traditional world and traditional worldview across all sorts of cultures, what happens on the material plane is a manifestation of what happens on the spiritual plane. You know, that as above, so below, as the Hermetic tradition would say. You know, so that things that happen in materiality are just expressions of things happening at a sort of deeper level. So the idea of having, for want of a better word, spirituality and physicality of martial arts as one thing is a very natural concept. But there's certain things that are clearly connected. So, for example, and especially to India being a sort of crux point, actually, because that was a point of exchange between East and West. So, fighting in an earthen pit, doing so for competition, doing so without weapons, and doing so for honor and for honor for the gods. And in order to prove yourself the best, i.e., the one that is essentially the substitute for the sacrifice, because this concept of martial arts as a sacrifice to the gods, and the victor being the substitute of the sacrificial victim, the one that's chosen by the gods. These are concepts that you find across from India all the way to Europe. The Greeks have the most profound expression of that, ultimately, because it just was, I guess, very, very much within the nature of the culture that developed there. This idea of the agon, the struggle, which is something that remains today in Greece, the agonistic society, as they call it. But there's certain concepts and certain threads that are found across the board. And so what's very interesting as well is if you're looking at timelines. So the oldest martial art, quote unquote, combat sport, complete combat sport, if you exclude wrestling and you exclude boxing, but like in terms of a martial art where you actually have all striking, all grappling, is ancient Greek pankration. It predates pretty much everything else that exists across the world, especially because it's a complex, full system which involves all elements of combat. Now, that develops in Greece. And then, while Alexander the Great himself was not known to be a practitioner of the art, he brought his soldiers with him who were. And everywhere he went, he set up a gymnasium, and a palestra, a wrestling school. So every single one of the cities that he set up has a palestra, has that. And the furthest one is deep into Greco-Bactria in a place called Ai-Khanum on the edge of Afghanistan, what's modern Afghanistan. And they have a palestra there from Alexander the Great's time, from his successors, actually, I believe. That point right there intersects with India. And India had a martial tradition, but there is plentiful evidence from what I've been putting together and from my work that those, while they also come from a common ancient origin, these Indo-European people, they also cross-pollinate at certain points. And that cross-pollination there, where there's the exchange between the Macedonian Greeks and the Greeks generally and the Indians, becomes a sort of interesting little crux, little kind of like hub of something. But what's really fascinating, and of course this is all kind of pie in the sky, if you know what I mean, if in some regards, because it's very difficult to prove any of this stuff, but the Chinese kung fu tradition of Shaolin, for example, is said to come from Bodhidharma, and Bodhidharma is an Indian monk who comes across from India. And he's actually, while they say in some texts he's South Indian or he's Indian, the Chinese texts describe him as a blue-eyed barbarian. And they use a phrase that means he could even be Iranian or Northern Indian. It's difficult to kind of exactly pinpoint from the Chinese language because they use this language for that entire area. But he's described as being this blue-eyed barbarian that comes across from India and brings Buddhism, which becomes Chan or Zen Buddhism, but also the martial arts. And so while that isn't evidence in itself, there's an interesting little kind of oral tradition and suggestion that something was brought over from that point. And Bodhidharma, of course, is from what, the 6th century or something like that. Maybe I'm maybe slightly off on that date, but it's like 800 or 900 years after Alexander was in that area. So there's interesting threads that certain things.
Okay. So you said 6 about the 80.
Yeah. So yeah, Bodhidharma is in the ADs, and Alexander is there in the 300
BC,
whatever BC.
Yeah.
There's basically about 900 years.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
It is interesting.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, well, the fact that even if you are studying, well, in my case, because I was doing martial arts, but when I was a kid, more like kickboxing, that kind of idea, and then I went into to the traditional Shotokan school, which is Japanese, well, Okinawan in his genesis, I guess. But yeah, I found this connection with China and then with India, which is crazy.
It's very interesting because, I mean, obviously there must be some kind of martial tradition there already, but the fact that it could infect and sort of have a conversation with something from somewhere else means that information from the West absolutely could have kind of made its way into, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. And he got different readings because obviously, anyways, you can see the parallels, but at the same time you can see the differences. Like what was the word of the Greeks had the palestra? How you call
palestra? The wrestling school.
That will be like a dojo, I guess.
Correct. I mean, the palestra is very interesting because, again, just like in Asian tradition, if you went to the palestra, the gymnasium, that ultimately you learned wrestling, you learned boxing and pankration, maybe, right? But you also learned philosophy, you also learned music, you learned art, you learned culture, you learned debate, you learned how to use your mouth, as well as how to use your hand, how to use your brain. And it's that Plato talks about it, but he puts it in Socrates' words and makes Socrates say it. But ultimately, the idea that the athlete alone or the warrior is too much of a thug, and the philosopher alone is a thinker and a weak man. Actually, what you really need is to have the combination of the both to make the perfect citizen, a philosopher athlete, somebody who is both skilled in combat, fighting, arts, and physicality, and some at the same time skilled in culture, thought, and the arts. That one or the other alone is not good enough. You need both to be complete. And so that's something you see as well in a lot of traditional Asian martial arts. This idea of the of yin and yang. You know that you can't just be a fighter because that's insufficient. You have to be a thinker. You have to be cultured. You have to understand certain cultural elements. Otherwise, you're never going to be complete.
That's amazing. And actually, yesterday I was in a conversation because there was exams in the dojo. So, well, you know, like in this kind of Japanese idea, you will have well, actually, it's very common through martial arts that you get your degrees and your belts and everything. So it was a bunch of people doing it. And after we went for dinner, so we were talking with the person who is the chairman here in Chile, which is the person that will give you the grades. I mean the belts, let's say. And we were talking about the competition. Well, in this case, WKF in karate, the World Karate Federation, which is like sports, completely sports.
Yeah.
Which are amazing athletes. They move like freaking. It's just amazing. I've seen some competitions.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
They are athletes, but they will train in the actual dojo. They will not train the let's say in a traditional one. You will have the a very specific way of the things you are training, and also you have a way of behavior on it, a way of, you know, which it maintains a bit. It's not the same, I'm absolutely sure, as in the old times, but you get a bit of everything that the martial art wants to give you, not just the competition part of it or not just the fighting part of it, and that can be also very kind of tricky because at the same time it should work also as a fighting system, I guess.
Right.
But so in modern times, how difficult you see or what you've seen in the world, like how far away from the idea of the complete development of a person we are now.
We've come far from it. I mean, it's something that I kind of hope in some ways I can help instill back into the West, because we've lost that. Like if you look at, so I train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I also train Muay Thai. And so from Muay Thai, there is a cultural background. There is a kind of idea of making sure that you fit in with originally the 5 Buddhist precepts. You know, you shouldn't kill, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't lie. You know, these kind of moral and ethical concepts that go with traditional Muay Thai, with Muay Thai in general. But if you come to the West, those things don't necessarily get transmitted along with the fighting side. And then you look at modern jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and then in America, what's sort of just generally kind of become jiu-jitsu, they call it these days, which is just a kind of modern style of no-gi jiu-jitsu particularly. And, you know, that's the style that I predominantly train these days myself. That has almost no code of conduct. It has almost no culture, deeper culture that goes with it. The culture that has developed in jiu-jitsu is kind of asinine. It's
Hello crew, greetings from the road. I just wanted to communicate that we just opened our Stones and Serpents Patreon. Finally, we are now constantly uploading different audiovisual materials. Some are free and some are not. We are sharing SNS behind the scenes, raw footage of the current Eastern expedition, official soundtracks, and even collections of future productions like shortcuts and documentaries. Finally, I would like also to encourage all of you to become a part of the Explorer chat. It's free and gives us a good platform to engage in research. Please feel free to scout the different modalities, from free member to an Explorer membership or Territory Explorer, or even a Pathfinder membership where we can co-produce and open a direct contact with the SNS production board. to even create new projects and to do what we all love the most, to explore new territories. We're an independent production company, and this is part of our organic growth. So we deeply appreciate your support. Thank you all. And again, greetings from the crew.
Irreverent, which can be fun, you know, don't get me wrong. Going into I'm from a 10th Planet gym is my gym, and 10th Planet is very chill, it's very relaxed, it's like that's the style of the gym, and it's nice, you know, you haven't got some of those structures sometimes, but in the same time there's something kind of missing from a gym that doesn't have something deeper to it, you know. It's one of the reasons why I like teaching the kids classes, for example, for Muay Thai, because I'm able to teach that younger generation something more than just here's how you fight. I try to, at the same time as doing that, instill some sort of moral ideas or concepts, things that they can think about. And I don't try and kind of push my opinions on them particularly, but I try and give them something good that they can take into life with the martial arts, because martial arts aren't just about fighting. Martial arts are about how you approach life. It's about your morality and psychology. It's about how you can walk through the world and be able to live a good life. I think that's the real power of martial arts, more than the fighting side of things, is the kind of inner power, you know. Chinese martial arts and Chinese ideas of kind of, you know, inner alchemy and you know, Neidan, as they call it, you know, like these ideas that there's a transformation that happens inside as well as on the outside. It is something that's missing, especially in the West, especially in modern martial arts. Like, tell me, what is the philosophy of MMA? Tell me, what is the philosophy of modern jiu-jitsu? Like, I don't think anybody can, because I don't think it exists. You know, but tell me some of the philosophies from traditional Asian martial arts. If you're somebody who practices those, you can tell me some philosophical ideas. You can tell me about Taoism or Buddhism or some of the kind of concepts that go along with it. But you can't tell me that about modern MMA, which is this kind of fundamental defining Western martial art at this point in time. There's no morality. It's just, here's how to fight, here's how to beat someone in a fight, and that's that, which... fine, that is what it is in itself, but I feel like if you're going into it to try and pick up something of a martial art in a complete way, you will find it certainly lacking in the other side of that equation, the spirituality and philosophical morality.
Yes, definitely. And at the same time, I guess it's not easy to find that way, like, because obviously you cannot replicate what you will like completely used to happen, you know.
No, you have to. It has to kind of grow organically too, you know. And it's just not happening.
Okay, yeah.
Because it's rootless.
Yes.
Like, the thing about these traditional martial arts is they're rooted, whereas MMA is not rooted. It's a mix of all things.
Okay. I get what you're going. Yes, and also it was a part of the educational system since very early age, I guess. Also, like these ideas were like, as you were saying, in the Greek side, they were being educated in the whole dimensions of for person in the dojo that they.
The idea of the Spartan agoge. So, up until the age of 7, the boy. Because if we're talking about men here in terms of the warriors, traditionally it was males. Okay, so women were raised by women, and boys were raised by women until they were about 7 years old. From the age of 7 years old, they exit the world of women and enter the world of men. That means boys are then raised by men, and that's something that isn't true today in society. Like, you know, obviously men have a role, but like, the role of men raising boys has been incredibly diminished. I mean, the school system is predominantly female in the United States and in Europe. It's mostly female teachers, which is fine, it is what it is, but it isn't the men raising those boys. And so what would happen is at the age of 7, the boys go into the world of men. From that age until they're about 17, they are educated about how to be men in society. Yeah, that involves the physicality, the philosophy, the spirituality, these things we're talking about the gymnasion. After 17, well, at 17, they go through their trial, which is like I was saying with the wolf cult, for example. They have to go off into nature. They have to go through something very hard that changes them. It tests all the things they've learned. They have to put it into practice. They have to survive and live outside of society and actually make that work for themselves. And then after a couple of years there, they come back into society and their initiation is completed, and then they become members of society. Like, this is the ancient system. And that's something that is absolutely non-existent at this point. We don't have initiations for either men or women, because women also had initiations. As in, like at Brauron in Greece, Vravrona is called, near Athens, which was where the girls were initiated into the cult of Artemis. So there are male and female initiations in antiquity, but in the modern world, we don't have those initiations. So we don't have that education in how to be an adult member of society and a complete adult member of society.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that was part of a conversation we had also last time about the role of men and women. Because as we were tracing the oracles, obviously you will encounter yourself with the world of women, which you don't talk too much, and people don't know too much. Like, let's say the oracles were being trained since 0 years, and they were being trained in physics stuff. Like, they were completely fit. As they were being trained in the use of different pharmakeas, and because the oracles is just women, and they were very educated, and also nobody will challenge anything that the oracle will say ultimately. So,
well, I mean, because female is the channel of the gods, the channel of nature. Like, that's the role of that. Basically, an oracle has to be a woman, because a woman is the only person who can channel the gods in that way. In traditional society, and obviously even now, I mean, women are more in tune with nature. They're more in tune with certain things. The idea that we have a women's intuition, right? Where they say it, it's women's intuition. It's because there is an intuitive element within women that is not the same as the one that's inside men. Maybe men are a little bit more blind to certain things.
Yes, and why do I bring this up? Because I think it's very important when we try to have a picture of like ancient times, and when we talk about education focuses, let's say, as we talk about this part of the martial way, I think it's important to understand that their society also had the understanding of the feminine side in this other kind of way, which it was actually last word will be the oracle, not even the king.
In terms of the spiritual world, I mean, like, so there's the concept in Indian tradition of Shiva and Shakti, and inside the man is this female energy. The Shakti is this power, it's this immense, boundless power, but it's female. It's personified by a goddess. And if you look again into the Greek side of things, who is the patron of warriors? It's not Ares. Ares is the god of war. Athena's the god of warriors, goddess of warriors. It's fit. She's feminine. It's a feminine power.
Yeah.
And that gets manifested later into the idea of chivalry. These knights of medieval times dedicated it to a woman. And that's because that kind of power is traditionally always seen as being a feminine power, or personified by a female force.
And if you see, let's say, the other side, and you see Apollo, which will be a musician, and a very beautiful musician, will not be, obviously, as all gods of ancient Greece, very fit looking, But as you were saying, Athena will be the warrior
Yeah.
energy and justice.
Yeah, she is. She's the actually the complete warrior because, like we said, Ares, he's just this force of war, like this force of violence, but there's no depth to it beyond that. Whereas Athena is strategy, cleverness, cunning. That's why if you look at something like the Odyssey, yeah, she's by Odysseus's side because Odysseus personifies those same ideas of cleverness, of trickery, of having to be smart, of not just being a blunt force trauma, that you have to be, smart about things and have more than one dimension to you as a warrior, that you have to be multidimensional. And so that is Athena, really, ultimately. She's born from Zeus's head. She's from the brain, she's from the mind of the father of gods and men, as he's called in ancient times. So she's a very potent force, and she is specifically associated only with men, pretty much, and only with warrior, and mostly with warriors, craftsmen too, to some degree, because they use cleverness as well. But she is a warrior goddess for the men.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because this is, you can infer like a very accurate, and not obvious right away idea of creating these archetypes, or it's like if you dive into it, you will find these subtleties that you were just saying, which obviously is part of...
The ancient world is complex. People like to try and simplify things.
Exactly.
Like humanity is complex, right? And so all things have a level of complexity, and they had an incredibly sophisticated and developed spirituality, philosophy, and culture. That really we feel like at this point in time, being modern people, being moderns, is that we figured it all out, and that we've come out of this sort of primitive nature into these amazing developed people that we are today. But ultimately, I think in many ways we've devolved. We've lost a lot of complexity and powerful ideas, and we've lost them to something more simplistic and more black and white. That there's something actually more profound and deep in antiquity, and some things that aren't. Of course, different the way it works, but like we've actually lost a lot rather than we've gained, but we've lost. And we've lost actually some things that are very important. For all our technological advances, we've lost some of our humanity.
Mm-hmm. And the idea of self-development in an integral way, or more, when, yeah, as you said, a word that's been appearing, it is like this idea of the materialism, as not as a philosophical idea, more like at everything of which is not of the intellect, it becomes absolutely detached from you, or becomes something that is not part of your everyday chemistry, let's say.
Yeah, right.
Then it can be in the somewhere, an idea, that a religious idea, right, even, but that will not be part of your chemistry every day. It just can be part just in your intellect.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because we have like these ancient ideas of like levels, that there's the material plane, spiritual plane, and that's actually reflected in, for example, in Buddhism, with the sort of the different bodies, of the Buddha, the three different bodies, the kayas, the spiritual body, the physical body, and then the ultimate body. These ideas like this, those are reflections of what were considered the same way in Europe and in traditional society in general, that there's these different planes, and that we're also kind of all functioning on all of them in different ways and at different times. And that ultimately what's happened is we've given so much weight to materiality and the material world that we've kind of obscured these sort of higher elements, these higher versions of these things. So we're now even just the way we kind of value things. I mean, look right now. I mean, what is a human value now? Human value is measured mostly in terms of economics. That's a terrible measure of value. Ultimately, it's one specific measure, but it's like, why is that one chosen? Like, why are there not other ways to value a human being and a human life? But that's not. We live in an age which, in ancient times, in the Indian tradition, is the Kali Yuga, or in Greek times, the Dark Age, which is this hyper-materialistic age where order has become disheveled and out of place, how respect and the understanding of how the world works and the connection between the spiritual, the divine, and the earthly have become completely disconnected. And it's kind of like, what's interesting is those concepts were there in antiquity, that we're going to be going through that, and here we are. We've become very disconnected from higher ideas. We've become very disconnected from the spiritual plane. We've become very much rooted in this hyper materialistic modern world where, like I said, economic value is the absolute measure of everything, which is just, and I honestly think, a pretty awful way of looking at the world. That everything has a price tag of some description, and I think that's just so crass and low compared to the way that those things would have been looked at in a different time.
Yes, and seems like this disconnection, as you study ancient times, well, it looks very evident, and I guess that's why they called which he last for a bit, the Renaissance, like something happened in between that was disconnecting a lot of things that were growing before, let's say.
Yeah,
growing, isn't it? And also this idea of everything which you don't see is not there. It doesn't exist in this.
Right.
It doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't interact with you, which,
right.
I mean, you can see stuff happening with. I mean, I had this great analogy of Ammon the other day. He told me, well, you cannot see Eros, but you can see Eros effect.
Yes.
So is that real or is not real? It's happening right here or it's not happening right here? So
right.
Of course, you can see like it's I mean, it's
that's
happening. I mean, you are feeling the attraction or not,
right.
but you are not seeing it. So this will be like what they will call the invisible, and how they were trying to actually tap into it through initiations. And
correct. And it was correct. I mean, again, even in Buddhism, the idea of the material and immaterial planes, like that you have different levels of existence, and that there are both material planes, immaterial planes, worlds of form, worlds of no form, that these things are intangible. You can't grasp them and grab them, but you can feel them. You can experience things that you can't see. You can experience things that you can't take a hold of.
Exactly.
You can't grasp.
Exactly, and it will interact with you in your real world.
Yes.
So that's a very different view of saying, okay, once I'm dead, I'm going to see.
Yes.
This is not just that. It's like while you are alive. I guess that's why they had this idea of being born again.
Correct. And the idea that, to someone who has transcended the material world, so, some kind of holy man or something like that, somebody who has had a realization and seen, they're considered to have gone beyond time and space, to see all existence unfold before them, to see past, present, future, all as one thing. That, the idea that eternity is now. This is eternity. This is immortality. This moment now, to be fully in that moment and to be really fully in that moment and open to all that is before you, both material and immaterial, that is eternity. So these ideas of time and space can kind of dissolve in traditional concepts of existence, of being and becoming, that ultimately you can transcend these things and become what the Indians would have called the Chakravartin, the lord of the center of the wheel, that you are see all of time and space from the center of the wheel, that you're no longer kind of just on the edge of the wheel going through time in this sort of cycle, that you're in the middle. You're kind of on the world axis and able to move throughout time and space as you will. While these are kind of high concepts in some ways, you can, as a regular human being, sometimes feel those little touches of that, where you'll feel the hand of something which is not there but there. Like you'll feel like that for a moment that time is sort of dissolved, there is no past and present and future, that there is, and that that certain things manifest as always, and it's just like this kind of feeling. It's very difficult to kind of conceptualize that in a kind of intellectual way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess like those are memories that you have. Let's say like everybody has, like, I remember that moment because in that moment was kind of different. Probably, yeah, you tapped into your a different way of perceiving what was going on. And I guess this was the whole thing, like the thing with time, that what we will call like the pre-Socratic philosophers were talking all the time about this this relationship with time and going back and forward in time in a cave and try to explain it and in a very scientific manner, like that probably you will call it now, well, that religion and science and everything was interconnected, obviously.
Yeah, correct.
And the whole point of the initiation was for you to go and see for yourself and then be able to function in society, knowing and having this. So
right,
I think it's absolutely, I mean, imagine we will have an initiation like that, like right now, to everybody.
Right. I mean, it's the idea, right? You don't know until you can experience it for yourself. Like you can only take other people's words, but until you experience it and see it, you can't understand it. And so, for example, the Eleusinian mysteries, right? So throughout antiquity, almost nothing was revealed about the mysteries. We have like almost nothing revealed. And like people can say, oh, well, that's because of the fear of the goddess or whatever. And the injunction of like, you will be destroyed if you'll be punished for letting the mysteries out of the bag, basically. But also the truth of the matter is if you've experienced something at that deeper level, at that deeper psychological level, how on earth do you put that into words? How on earth can you transmit that? Like that's something that has to be experienced. It has to be felt and understood in a way that goes beyond the sort of, intellectual concepts of things, that you can't say, well, this happens and then this happens and this happens, because it was something that happened on a much deeper level to the initiate. They couldn't put it into words.
Yes, I know what you mean. And even if you will have a text like the Mithraic liturgy, well, they will give you step by step. You will say, "What the fuck is this, man? I mean, what? And you will see what, and you have to say what." So yeah, I mean, I guess what you're, if I'm understanding, is like the mystery itself will keep as a mystery without even you trying.
Right, because the mystery remains a mystery apart from to those who've experienced it and understood it through direct experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing, man. And would you mind if I change the subject and give you just one straight question for...
Shoot, ask away.
Which you will, I don't want to take too much time out of you, Tom.
Thank you, no, that's like...
But this has been like amazing conversation.
So really enjoyed
way better than the outline. But I have this, which is very important for the actual conversation, which is like very straightforward. What is pancreation?
Pancration.
Pancration, I'm sorry.
Pancration, yeah. So sometimes people call it pancration, but the correct pronunciation is either pancration or pancratio. Pancration is the name means all mastery. Sometimes it's translated as all powers, but that's slightly wrong. I mean, it's not wrong, but it's like they're taking kratos there to mean power, whereas the actual root word there means the mastery of something. So pan is everything, and kratos, kration, part means mastery of it. So it essentially is an ancient Greek combat sport, which derives from the battlefield, but is not necessarily used on the battlefield, even though some ancient writers try to insinuate that it does, but it wouldn't necessarily work on the battlefield because melee warfare is very different from single combat. But ultimately, it derives from single combat, monomachia, and it is an empty-handed, all-in fighting style that allows for basically all striking, knees, elbows, punches, different hand strikes, palm strikes, finger strikes, thumb strikes, even there's evidence of. There are and all grappling like chokes, joint locks, cranks, any kind of joint manipulation. Maybe some small joint manipulation was not allowed under certain rule sets, like fingers, for example, because there's specific prohibitions in writing about that, but that didn't stop some people. There's famous guy called Sosistratos, who was a finger bender. But so they essentially it's very similar in many regards to modern MMA, except it is somewhat less restrictive, but did have a rule set, including, there was often there seems like groin strikes were not permitted, and gouging and biting and those sorts of things that would be not permitted in modern combat sports were not permitted. It was a sport. I mean, there's only in the entire history of ancient Greek combat sports, through the ancient game circuits, there are, I believe, 8 recorded deaths of athletes, and only 2 of those were pancratiasts. So, I mean, in a 1,000-year period, only 2 recorded deaths. There may have been more, but there 2 are actually at any of the significant games. So it must have had a fairly rigorous rule set, because they're not there to kill each other. Even though some modern scholars will be like, it was a fight to the death. You get these kind of these myths, which are just not true. I mean, just then it's not possible for them to be true. Otherwise, you'd have a lot of recorded deaths, and no one would really do the sport. So it was a sport that was performed, and you would win when one person gave up, and they would either give up by tapping or by raising their finger in the air to the referee, to the rabdihi, the rod bearer, the rod to beat them with, and he would they'd indicate to the judge basically that they give up, and that's how you'd win the fight. And so that is a sport that you can trace to at least 700 BC, at least. Earlier, like much. It's likely, highly likely, it's much earlier. And it developed, and it was in use until at least the 4th century AD, so 300 something AD, and it probably died out at the same time as the games died out, because it was intrinsically linked to games. And the games died out because of 2 Christian emperors, Theodosius I, who banned the worship of pagan idols and pagan rites, which meant that was the end of the games themselves, because the games were all sacred games to gods. And then his grandson Theodosius II, who ordered the destruction of the temples. And so at that point, ultimately, that was the end of that sport.
And yeah, I was going to ask you, because as we were tracing the mystery rites, also at the same point, it was actually also forbidden. Yes. In the same 400s AD.
And what's very interesting right there, actually, as an aside, is that one of the greatest sources for the Eleusinian mysteries is Clement of Alexandria. And Clement of Alexandria was a Christian bishop. But before he was a Christian, he was a pagan because he was a convert, and he actually experienced the mysteries. He was an initiate of the mysteries, but even so, even when writing about it, there's something that stopped him short of really revealing too much. There's still something there in his psyche that's like he's still a little afraid to say really what's going on there. It's kind of interesting that even because it's again one of those things that the early Christian fathers are more pagan than modern pagans are, for example, but they still have that pagan, want of better pagan, traditional ancient religion still there is very much part of them, even though they've converted to Christianity. You know, there's still something that stops him saying this is what happens. Like there's still a fear, there's still something that just holds him back. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, how everything is connected in their culture. Like, yeah, I mean, as I was telling you, we were going into a different topic, but now we are talking about this other topic, which was a big part of the whole culture. You can see how everything is part of one culture. Yeah. And nowadays, because let's say here, not that I know, here we have, you can train if you want, like Greco-Roman wrestling, of course. We have that here. My brother actually likes to train that also. But what about the pancration? Because here you will not find anything like that. You think there's
won't find traditional pancration almost anywhere, because it's something that is basically lost, but it gets reconstructed by certain people. So one of my efforts has been trying to reconstruct it. There are others. In Italy, there's actually several reconstruction groups that are right in some ways and wrong in other ways, in my opinion. But I'm sure they would say the same about me. And then in Greece, there's a couple of people who are really very, very good who I've trained with. But in Greece, they have what's called Bagratio Athlema, or Athlema Pancration, which is the modern neo-pancration that they have, which is just really a modern construction from karate and judo, ultimately. They've just made they've made a martial art and called it pancration, and not to try and ruffle feathers, but there's a lot of incentive for you to have a pancration school because you get government funding, whereas you don't get government funding for your karate school or your MMA school. Although actually MMA just got recognized by the Greek government, so there might be some funding now for that. But it was one of those things where in the 70s and 80s and 90s, when they were kind of creating that, there may have been other incentives to do so, and they sticking like ancient names on things that have no basis in historical evidence is part and parcel of that to some degree. So you can find quite easily new pancration, neo-pancration, or athlema, athletic pancration, which is the new style, but you will struggle endlessly to try and find the original pancration because it doesn't really exist. I try to do my part to do my research and reconstruction, which involves understanding the text, understanding artwork, having a good basis in some sort of training of understanding how to read archaeological evidence, how to read textual evidence, and then at the same time also having a background in combat sports, which is something that's very rare to have all those two sides of that equation, because archaeologists and academics often don't have the physical side, and people who are martial artists don't necessarily have the academic side. So there's very few people who actually are able to bridge that.
Well, I understand. But when you say try to reconstruct it, I guess it will be always through evidence, through text, I guess.
Yeah. Text, text beats artwork, but ultimately you try to take the fragments of text that remain, and there's a few, and then you try to understand that, try and visualize that, try and marry that to artwork from ancient artwork if it's available. If you can put those two things together, then it becomes a very powerful tool to understand. And then you then put that into a physical tested practice to see if that theory basically of yours holds water, if it would work, if it's something that you could actually do.
Yeah, but I can see it happening. I mean, I've seen the material you do, and in your Instagram, which you always show a picture or an evidence or something, and you do the actual, which makes sense when you have a bit of a background. You understand that, okay, the lock is going that way. I mean, for you, it will be so easy to understand that is towards the joint of the shoulder or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
But another thing that I just comes to my mind is that I've been understanding that the amount of Greek text we have now is such a vast amount of text that is not being translated yet. I mean, the philologists are actively translating every day. With the one that I'm working with. So probably if you go and actually try to find this kind of with specific words to find text, I'm sure probably a lot more can be found. Maybe I'm not sure.
Yeah, but no, absolutely. So we have stuff that's in existence, yes, and then also like some of the papyri, you know, from Egypt, the Oxyrhynchus papyrus. So basically, there's a whole cache of like papyrus texts and fragments that were found in the desert in the early 20th century, and like they're still working through that. I think, I mean, there's thousands and thousands of them in little tiny fragments. That's where we have, for example, an old part of an old wrestling manual was found, you know, and so it's again in sort of interesting language, so you have to interpret it
and has been,
but that was found,
and that has been translated, has been already translated.
Yeah, that's been translated. It's very short. It's just like a small passage, but like, you know, it was part of something bigger.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, the Greeks were writing everything.
Yeah.
And all of the wrestlers probably knew how to write and sing and dance.
And I mean, a lot of so in terms of the pancration and boxing and wrestling, a lot of the evidence you get is from other texts, things like philosophy. Because, for example, Plato, as an example, uses a lot of metaphor from the palestra, from the wrestling school, because he assumes that people who would be reading or listening to his work would understand that, because they are men who have gone through that training system. So it's easy to use a metaphor from wrestling because, oh, that's more understandable than me trying to do some other high concept. I'll use a wrestling thing. And it's, for example, one of the great sources is a guy called Philon of Alexandria. Now, Philon was a Hellenized Jew. He was trying to put across Jewish concepts in Greek for a Greek-speaking Jewish audience. But what he did was he wrote his metaphors. A lot of them are about pancration, about wrestling, and they're about like the struggles, spiritual struggles or things like this. But he uses these things, and because of that, we've preserved some very interesting techniques and other information, all from his texts, you know, which have survived in quite astonishing volume, actually. So you have to actually look quite far and wide. It's like if you're just looking for sporting texts, there's not much. There's like
I know what you mean.
Illustratos, and that's kind of really about it. A bit of it in Galen, but you have to look further, and you'll find it.